guys, welcome back to the Capital Mindset Show. We are your hosts, Austin and Fabio. So we received a subscriber request a couple of videos back that we did, Fabio, where they wanted us, they said, and I quote their words, I won't give out any names, but I quote their words, it's time to do a cryptocurrency video. So today we're going to be mainly talking about Bitcoin, some blockchain technology, what our opinions are on the fiat currency versus digital currencies, et cetera, and so forth, as well as how governments around the world have started to adopt cryptocurrencies and what the ramifications are of those, as well as what Fabio's future projections might be for the currency itself. So without further ado, let's get started. What are we looking at here today? And let's start, let me ask, just so we set the baseline for some of our viewers today, what is the blockchain, Fabio?
All right, so I guess I'll summarize it simply so everyone can kind of be on the same page. The blockchain is a technology, right? You might have already known that, but basically the premise of it is that it is a system or a network that can verify what we can call transactions, or better to say, exchanges. And the technology as a whole is going to be utilized in a lot of different industries. For example, the big four accounting firms probably within the next couple of years are going to be heavily utilizing blockchain in their auditing. Companies are going to be using blockchain in their inventory management. Now, blockchain is a huge buzzword, so we have to clarify that first. So you got to be careful when a company is, touting blockchain. And that's actually the greatest danger that I'll highlight here in the beginning of this video. Going forward in this video, remember that the majority of this industry, or if you can call it that, is going to be hype and buzzwords because it's new. It's kind of like the internet age when the .com bubble, kind of spurred through. The internet age came through with a lot of companies that were not even generating revenues, or, in some, those were the extreme cases, and they were valued at extraordinary sums of capital. You could probably say the electric vehicle market is somewhat like that right now. But for the most part, blockchain itself, the idea of blockchain or the concept of blockchain, there's a lot of companies that are going to try to lure you in and say, hey, invest in us because we're doing the blockchain, and then they're not specifically saying why or the way they're doing it. Maybe to the inexperienced investor might think that, oh, that's revolutionary because they use the word blockchain and revolutionize in the same sense. And that's fair because our bias is to inherently trust, authority, right? And the authority is the management team, for example. And then we get lulled in and, all this promise of making tons of money. But blockchain is technology. Let's separate that and say, yes, that has a future. Okay, so then crypto is a form of blockchain usage, and cryptocurrency is the idea that you can utilize the blockchain to improve upon the mediums of exchange. And there is a basis of this. So I'll say for the grand majority of cryptocurrencies, I do believe they will all go to zero. And I actually think when I say grand majority, the only one I feasibly see maintaining itself is perhaps one or two of them. And I'll discuss which ones those are.
Yeah, and then also to kind of prime the audience is thinking now exactly that. What is sort of the why behind these, as well as let's kind of get into the macro a little bit. What is or are some of the potential benefits of using a cryptocurrency versus a fiat currency? Is this that it takes you out of the system? Is that what the inherent value in cryptocurrencies are? Is that they're removed from the system? Therefore, how would you, if you were to buy a cryptocurrency today, what would you want to do? Would you want to basically own this in a cold wallet through a broker, something like that? What are some of the strategies here that you might employ in this instance?
So gold, I'll start with gold actually, like as an example as to why. Gold was the natural decision for humans to choose as mediums of exchange, because currency, money, is a tool, right? It's a way for us to effectively exchange resources amongst each other in a form of a value we can all agree upon. Gold was the natural conclusion for humanity to choose because it was imperishable, and gold is the same as gold everywhere in the world. It's equal. So there won't be any confusion in between, okay, Austin's gold versus my gold. It's the same. And so that's what currency allows. It's fungible, right? So people have heard the word NFT, non-fungible token. Well, currency has to be fungible. So My gold has to be the same as Austin's gold. My dollar has to be the same as Austin's dollar. In that way, we can easily ascribe value to that, right? And then Austin and I have to agree upon the value of that said medium of exchange. That's what currency is at the end of the day, a tool. So gold was useful because of its stability in terms of its supply, right? You can't just all of a sudden, pop up and create new gold. Gold has to be found and extracted, and then you can put the gold into the supply, but there's a finite number of gold. And that allowed for a form of or sense of stability. And it went beyond the jurisdiction of governments. So governments themselves could not simply decide, this is the currency we will use. And when they would always try to do it, but eventually would fail. But it allowed for a sense of normalcy, fungibility. So one country's currency would be more or less the same as another country's currency, as long as the content of gold was the same. So that was the idea or the premise, and humanity chose it, right? And then eventually we ascribed a lot of value to gold. So gold was then made as jewelry because it became symbols of wealth over time. And then in the modern era, we found out all these other use cases of gold in terms of technology because of its unreactiveness to a lot of substances or a lot of
well, yeah, doesn't that kind of play into the fact that gold doesn't corrode and other, because they might have tried it with other precious metals, let's say. And then it was the fact that gold couldn't corrode, that was also just inherent in the fact that it could keep its value as a medium of exchange over time.
Yes, because you could have a vault full of iron coins, and eventually the iron coins would rust away. But if you had a vault full of gold coins, you could lock that away for tens of thousands of years in theory, and it would stay the same 10,000 gold coins, for example, or whatever number I said. I don't even think I said a number. But that was why it was the natural progression to choose that. But my point is, humanity or civilizations around the world chose that. Now, cryptocurrency has to, in my opinion, be kind of chosen by society. And that's the difficulty of it. It's the unpredictability of what someone will choose. And that's why the best way, in my opinion, to ever play anything is to just own the assets and then demand the currency at the end of the day that you believe ascribes value. So if I hold assets, I can request payment in certain whatever currency I want. And if you want to utilize my asset or you want to utilize the things that I'm providing, you must pay me in the thing that I desire. I drive the demand for the currency, and then you want the currency for the things that I provide. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So if I tomorrow say all my stuff has to be paid in gold, and otherwise, I don't want to rent out, you can choose not to engage in business with me. But if you want to engage in business with me and I want gold from you, then that's what I'll ask for. Okay. So that's what I say is perhaps the easiest way to play, is just focus on holding assets long periods of time. But however, if, for example, humanity were to choose a cryptocurrency, then there's some value to be provided, because, for example, you can say in the theoretical realm, because that's where we're entering now, because it hasn't happened yet, said cryptocurrency would rise in value relative to the usage of said cryptocurrency within the world economy, because this is where things get confusing.
Yeah, and I also think too, especially to the astute listener right now, they would also note that, okay, well, we're already seeing countries like El Salvador, for example, they're already starting to adopt cryptocurrency. I believe Venezuela, I think the Venezuelan government has actually outlawed the use of cryptocurrency, but a lot of Venezuelans are keeping their wealth in cryptocurrency. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But the thing about it is that I think it's interesting that as we sort of enter the theory of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, to specifically note that. So now kind of where my thoughts really go with that is, okay, is the value in a cryptocurrency derived then by its use cases on a massive scale, whereby governments all over the world start to adopt, let's say, for example, Bitcoin? What are then the ramifications for fiat currency in that instance then?
Well, I'll kind of simplify it today, because this is the problem with having this kind of conversation. It's you got to think of it from kind of a different perspective. So right now, our minds, because we've lived in this system for quite a long time, you and I, our whole lives, we think of the system in terms of dollars. So we have a system and the value is in terms of dollars. So I will use the number of dollars of today's value of dollars going forward. So I hope everyone kind of keeps track of that. When I say the word dollars, I'm doing that in a way so that all of us can come to an understanding to conceptualize the measure of value. So let's say, for example, the United States economy is $24 trillion, right? $24 trillion. This is the representation, and I'm just making up this number. It might not be the GDP today. I'm just making it up, right? Actually, let me make it easy on myself. Since we're not using the actual number, I'll make it 10 because 10 is very easy to divide amongst. All right, so $10 trillion. Then again, I'm using dollars, okay? Then if you say Bitcoin, right? Let's say Bitcoin is utilized in a fraction of that. So let's say it's $1 trillion, right? So it's $1 trillion, $1 trillion. All right, that's terrible one. I'll do better.
Yeah, it looks more like a 4. Yeah, just leave it like that.
So Bitcoin is, for example, in this case, a fraction of the total pie. And then if, let's say hypothetically, the use case of Bitcoin is actually becomes a currency of the United States de facto. People reject the dollar, and then no one wants to use that. We think of everything in terms of Bitcoin. Well, the value, that future value, would be in, again, today's terms, $10 trillion. That would be the cap, right? The eventual cap of Bitcoin would be 10 trillion. All right. So do you see why I'm using $10 trillion? It's so to help us conceptualize the value measure, right? Because that's what we know how to measure value currently. Okay. Now there's a huge problem. I'll get to the problem later with cryptos and why right now it's just a massive speculative bubble. But underneath that, there's a kernel of potential, a kernel of truth, just how there is with everything. We don't want to be so quick to dismiss things because then we miss out on understanding at the very least. So again,
you legitimately have to keep an open mind in this
exactly.
instance. Yeah,
you can participate in just by owning assets, and that's just the safest way to move forward in life. Just own assets. It's very simple because in this case, it's kind of a guessing game. It is a speculation that eventually a cryptocurrency that you believe in will become a highly utilized medium of exchange. Okay, so we live in, again, a dollarized system, and the dollar is, again, within the system, and a crypto, I would argue, holds value or derives some of its value by being outside of that system. Now, what do I mean by that?
Outside of the fiat currency system in this instance, then, correct?
Yeah, or outside of a system, because a system implies inputs and outputs, therefore some degree of measure of control. Gold, for example, it's not someone can't change the chemistry of gold. Someone can't change the chemistry of silver. Silver, gold is gold. My gold is the same as your gold. If we're looking at purity, if they're the same purity, it's going to be the same, right? So crypto, right? Depending on the crypto, the idea that it would probably be a successor to gold would be that it has to be fungible to some degree. So meaning the one Bitcoin is equal to another Bitcoin and they're indistinguishable from one another. That's very important, right? So an NFT can never be a currency because one NFT is different from another NFT. That's aside from the point of, whether or not NFTs are ridiculous or not. That's not the point. The point is the fungibility of it. Fungibility means, one is the same as another. So if Austin has a Bitcoin, I have a Bitcoin, we could trade this Bitcoin and it would be the exact same Bitcoin. Okay. So that's important for a currency in order to become an effective medium of exchange. All right, going back, should I discuss the problems now or should I continue?
Yes.
Okay, so the biggest problem today is everyone, and I got to go back to the drawing board. Everyone is thinking of the currency, the cryptocurrency, in terms of dollars. So I always have this conversation. And when I talk to a crypto bull, I always ask them the question, what do you think it's going to go to? All right. Or what do you think the price is going to go to? They usually always answer X amount of dollars, right? And then I say, why are you holding crypto? Because I think it's going to go up. And then, or I think it's going to rise in value. And then I ask, what do you mean rise in value? The inevitable end conclusion most of the time, like grand majority of the time, is they give me a number in terms of dollars. I use that, and I was very explicit in the beginning. I use that so that we could conceptualize the value. When I have these conversations, they don't do it to conceptualize the value. They're doing it because that is the value that and at the end of the day, they want. What I mean by that is the demand at the end of the day, if we think of supply and demand economics, is dollars, right? For most of these individuals involved in crypto, the demand is dollars, not the cryptocurrency itself. Okay, let me repeat what that kind of means. So at the end of the day, they're buying this for the idea that they one day are going to become a seller. They're going to acquire dollars and then use it in the market. They're going to buy whatever they want. So they don't actually have the end demand for the currency. There are some people that are like that, but I think they're a minority of the market presently. Okay. And there's a bigger problem that I'll discuss afterwards as to why I think feasibly there's only about 2 cryptos that might survive. Okay. Feasibly, that I'm under my humble opinion, and I'll explain why, what are my reasonings for that. If there's any that are going to survive, it'll be these 2. Because again, at the end of the day, it has to come by the population's choice, the choice of the population to recognize them as forms of value, just as we do with almost every other currency. And then the only reason why, for example, gold in the past, I want to be very careful how I say it, in the past became a reasonable value is because we chose it as a natural tool, right? Because it fit certain criteria. It was a tool as a medium of exchange. In the modern era, we have actual use cases beyond that, like, for example, in a technology. In the past, we ascribed value to it, and then it developed over time into jewelry. I don't want to get too much into that further, but just want to cover that because some people might say, hey, you're saying it has no use cases in the past. It's used in technology. Yes, in the modern era. And then, of course, the jewelry argument. Yes, but that was more or less after we ascribed a lot of value to it. But for example, let's talk about the open system and the closed system. Okay, what do I mean by that?
Yeah, what do you mean by that in this instance? Are you saying like an open system could be some way that an external agent could come into this particular cryptocurrency?
So let's say the grand majority of cryptos that we're seeing being developed, they have developer teams, right? And so if you discuss with someone who's, astute in computer science, they can better give you color on this, but I'm going to give you a very basic rundown. Okay. So I'm going to gloss over some things, but basically, if you have, let's say a Cardano, I'll just pick on one. Cardano is a system with the developer team. And I purposely did not finish the circle because this is an open system. What I mean by open system is inside the system, there's a developer team and they are making design changes, right? So in the beginning, they might be incorruptible. They believe that what they're doing is good for the system that they're creating. And they're developing this crazy new thing with a lot of use cases. Cool, all well and good. But the point is, there is a door from which they can access and make changes. That's what I will define as open system. So when I say open system, I mean a currency or in this case, an ecosystem that can have changes made to it by a developer team. Okay. Actively, like the rules could change, right? And they can adjust the nature of the coin going forward to make improvements. That's the idea behind it. It's never nefarious. It's to make improvements upon the coin. Okay, so the fact that even exists, and this is something I learned from a client of mine who gave me a lot more color. I won't say who he is or where he works, but he gave me a lot of color on this, and it kind of shifted my thought process on cryptos as a whole. This inherently, at the end of the day, in my opinion, will be worthless. All of these will be worthless. Coins like this will be worthless, except in some use cases of, for example, I'll say Ethereum. Ethereum has some use cases that can extend beyond the coin itself in terms of, developing systems within companies from which they can manage inventory better, for example, that's a use case value. And then there's the closed systems. So closed systems, think of actually the best one I can describe that we can conceptualize from the real world is gold. Gold in and of itself is a closed system. Unless you are the personified deity of this universe, right? You can't change the nature of gold itself. If you change the nature of gold itself, you're basically, if for example, like let's say you somehow removed electrons from gold or removed the proton or removed you change the atomic number, let's say, of gold. Well, then it's no longer gold per se. You've changed it. You've changed the nature of the element, right? Gold is gold, right? And so unless you are the deity of this universe, you can't really make changes to gold, right? We ascribe gold as gold. So this is a closed system. You can do whatever you want, but you can't really make any changes. You can't enter, right? So these are very rare, right? So we see this in nature, right? Closed systems. But in the technology space, we can think of this as actually Bitcoin. This is Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin, B for Bitcoin, D was developer for anyone confused. D meant developer. So there's a developer team inside the open system. And then Bitcoin is Bitcoin, basically. So Bitcoin had a creator at one point, and we don't really know who this person is or these people are. But what we kind of do know is that they're anonymous, and they basically threw the key in and closed the door behind them. So there's no developer team that can come up and say, we are now changing the rules of Bitcoin. We can change the rules tomorrow. So this allows, right, for Bitcoin to be a closed system, right? There's no developer team behind the Bitcoin project. Okay. You can do projects surrounding the use cases of Bitcoin, but you cannot change Bitcoin. Okay. So this is what I'm talking about with a closed system. And this, in my humble opinion, would be one of, if not the only crypto to survive. Okay. Because it is a closed system. Okay. And the closed nature of it allows the perfect fungibility of it, right? No matter what. So the other ones, they have developer teams at the end of the day who can be threatened, who can have a gun pointed to their head, who the state can coerce to make changes in favor of the state, therefore opting into an open system, into their system. But Bitcoin is dangerous for the states, is dangerous for governments around the world because of its closed nature. It's actually more or less digital gold, except it's not physical. And there is a valid argument to say, if everything shuts down, we have no access to energy, right? For example, then there's a problem with Bitcoin. It doesn't make it as easy. Okay. But it doesn't destroy its existence. Okay.
Something to note that you actually indicated earlier is that the widespread adoption of these cryptocurrencies, let's use Bitcoin now, for example, because it's a closed system, the widespread adoption of these specific cryptocurrencies comes from the population itself.
Yes.
Well, if the state cannot interject itself into, like it could, an open system cryptocurrency, then what credence or what is the risk profile that, let's say, for example, the government of the United States decides to ban Bitcoin in the future? I'm not making a proclamation. This is just more so just a speculation, just kind of throwing ideas out there. And then how would that hinder or impact the population adoption? Because we saw this happen in Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela is on a much smaller scale than the United States. The United States
or China,
is a reserve currency.
I love to use China. So again, this goes back to the closed system narrative. And this is a narrative I don't really hear discussed too much, very, very few places. Like, for example, and this kind of tells me why right now you're in the speculative era of these assets, because people don't quite yet understand what these systems are. Okay. So that's how you can kind of tell we're in the speculative era. So I wouldn't personally believe now is the time to even think about entering. And again, it's still at the end of the day until it's not a speculation, because what Austin's pointing out perfectly, he said the words widespread adoption. So the population has to together collectively decide, for whatever reason, that this is the form that we're going to represent value. And of course, the powers that be, I'll just say, governments wouldn't want that because it would constrain their ability to do a lot of things, right? Venezuela, the country I was born in, they made it illegal to utilize Bitcoin. It didn't stop the use of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin became a way for Venezuelans to transfer wealth out of the nation without the ability for the government to stop them, right? So if you realize what the government in Venezuela, it's becoming oppressive, you can send out your Bitcoin elsewhere, or you can smuggle it out. You put it on a flash drive, put it in your pocket, and then there you go. For example, in Nazi Germany, when the Jewish people wanted to escape, right, they had to carry out their gold. Of course, gold is more dense, the value measure. So they were able to get out more gold. But, you couldn't, it's very hard to get a caravan out of gold, but you could feasibly get $200 million worth of Bitcoin on a flash drive and just, walk out. Okay. It's more easy to maneuver that. And China, which is, let's use China as a better example, because some people might say, well, Venezuela is not technologically advanced. China is fairly technologically advanced, and they're not really able to stop the tide of usage of Bitcoin as a form of getting money out of the country. In fact, a lot of the demand for Bitcoin actually comes from China. People don't know that. Wow. Yeah. Even though it's illegal, and it's been illegal for quite some time now, it hasn't been able to stop it, because at the end of the day, a closed system actually cannot be stopped. right? If people tomorrow, everyone, for example, let's go back to gold, because again, people can conceptualize this if I use gold. If people tomorrow all decide the dollar has no value, right? And I don't really care. Collectively, as a population, we all decide dollar has no value. And then we say gold has all the value. I want you to give me gold in exchange for the products. And then at the end of the day, what do you demand? You don't really want the gold, and you don't even want the dollar. You want what it can get you, right? Think about that in like a philosophical sense. Austin does not want dollars for dollar's sake. He wants what the dollars can get him. And that's why he wants the dollars. So at the end of the day, the producers, right? The producers of everything, they are actually the true drivers of demand of currencies at the end of the day. Because what they want, and it's like an ecosystem, it's kind of chicken or the egg, to be honest, but they want at the end of the day something, and then you're going to give them that thing in order to get what you really want, which is goods and services, right? So Austin wants a Ferrari. Well, the company Ferrari asks him for, a currency, whatever currency it is. And if tomorrow Ferrari said, we only accept X for payment, Austin will have demand because he wants the car, demand for that currency, right? He'll go out and do whatever he can to get it.
Yeah. So now that's economics sort of in a nutshell.
Like
as well. So now I kind of have a question about the resistance from sort of the old system, as we kind of like to talk about here. Like, what sort of things are we seeing kind of in place right now that could potentially inhibit this ability, this widespread adoption? Now, as you've indicated, you don't actually believe the widespread adoption will slow down anytime soon, but what's something that could potentially inhibit this? That's what I'm kind of curious about right now.
Okay, so the only thing that can inhibit widespread adoption is the sentiment. So that's why sentiment has to be negative, right? So if at the end of the day, everyone decides collectively that we're not going to choose Bitcoin, but then Bitcoin is worthless, right? Because that's why you can't consider it an asset. You cannot consider an asset. It's either mediums of exchange or store of value, but it cannot be an asset. It does not produce anything, right? No currency does not produce, right? There's mediums of exchange and stores of value. The speculative value creation that you can achieve by owning a store of value is the adoption rate. So for example, again, gold, if you're buying gold today, you are speculating that it moves on. This is a bullish case for gold. If gold becomes adopted again globally as a medium of exchange, as a currency, you will actually experience real-time value. Because let's go back to the to this example that I was discussing. Again, conceptualize the $10 trillion economy, so 10, and then you have gold that, let's say, again, these are not real numbers, is a 1 trillion, right? If gold currently represents 1 trillion in terms of value of the economy, and its representation, because remember, we're thinking of it in terms of a store of value, okay? If all of a sudden gold becomes the entire economy, that's a 10x increase in value, in real term value. Because there's gold as the inflation hedge, which, let's say this economy inflates to 10 to 15 trillion, and then gold, maintains its store of value, right? So that would be 1.5. It would grow alongside. And this is theoretical. We're exiting the real world and going to theoretical. So I'm removing a lot of factors, but stick with me. Am I making sense, Austin? Yeah. Stop me if I'm not. But in the theoretical world, things inflate by 50%. Gold, its value representation rises by 15%. In a perfect world, apples to apples. Okay, so if gold, however, becomes the representation of value, and again, I have to use the number or the term $10 trillion because that's how we can think about it, right? It makes it easier for us to think about it. Then you have the actual value creation or the value realization that whatever you're holding rises in value by 10 times because it is now representing a 10 times larger system. Does that make sense? So gold is the representation of, I guess in this case over here, it's 1/10 of the system. Okay. And then if it becomes a full system, that's a potential realization of 10x, right? That's the way you would only become rich from gold. Otherwise, gold, silver, et cetera, if they maintain, their respective, circles, like in this example, then they're like inflation hedges and they're like savings accounts, right? And I think other people who are, considered gold bugs, they can explain that to you in a better way. But gold is not a way to get rich unless this were to happen. And then same with Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, the only way you're actually going to become quote unquote rich, right,
is if you buy assets. with Bitcoin as well, or yeah, the speculative nature that it goes up in dollars. Yeah.
No, not up in dollars. You see, that's why I want to avoid that. I'm using dollars not so that people get confused and come to that conclusion. Using dollars as a form of representative value so that our minds can conceptualize what is really going on.
Okay.
The $10 trillion system, right? And the $1 trillion gold system. If the gold were to become the representation of that 10 trillion, the gold's value would be
10 trillion.
10 trillion. Yes. And I'm using that word carefully because that is how our brains can understand it. Okay. But in that system, in that scenario, we would discard the dollar idea, right? We would think of it in ounces of gold. That's how it would be in that theoretical hypothetical system. Okay. And then same if you think of Bitcoin. Let's switch to gold and Bitcoin. Now the system is still $10 trillion. Bitcoin is $1 trillion. I'm using that term again so we can think about it. If Bitcoin were to become the medium of exchange, the representative value, if I used algebra, right? The representative value would be conceptually 10 trillion. It would 10x, right? In that specific scenario. Okay.
Oh, okay. Makes sense.
That makes sense. Yeah. I'm only using the dollar word because that's how our brains conceptualize the value of everything. And that's, again, part of the problem with buying today. You are participating in the speculative bubble because that's what it is. In the case that much of the buyers of cryptocurrency are not buying it for the cryptocurrency. They are buying it for the dollars. Their end demand is in dollars, nothing more. They don't want the currency at the end of the day. If you told them for certainty the currency would drop to zero, they would sell it. And I said zero in terms of what?
Zero in terms of dollars.
Yes, that's why they care about it. So if you told someone, oh, it's going to drop to zero in terms of dollars, and they panic and sell, it's because what? They want what? What do they really want?
Dollars.
They're panicking because in dollars it goes to zero because their end demand is in dollars. That's how they value everything. So if you see the sentiment change in some countries, this is happening. That's why I say don't dismiss it. In some countries, this is happening. They are excluding
because the demand is driven. Clicking. That's also why there's widespread adoption because exactly that there isn't demand for their own currency, that therefore they're demanding this.
We have a bias in the United States.
Yes.
We have a bias in the United States. We have a relatively stable currency.
Yes. Which makes sense exactly what you're saying. So this isn't even a dollar issue, basically. This is just simple global economics. It's the thing with, let's say, US citizens, when they look at Bitcoin, what they're seeing is they're seeing it in terms of dollar value.
Yes. And it's very hard to escape it. It's very hard to
down. Bitcoin is up again. Bitcoin is down. This is all in basically relative dollar values. Meanwhile, what we're seeing around the world in Venezuela and China is that the demand is higher for Bitcoin, this specific digital blockchain-based currency, rather than their own currencies, which is leading to this widespread adoption because the end demand here is actually physically Bitcoin and not the actual local currency. But then my question here is that we know that the United States is the world reserve currency. In this instance, then let's say that we take a Venezuelan citizen who decides to move his wealth into Bitcoin and then get his wealth out of the country. Would that end demand then still be dollars? Which is leading me to my next point. Is everyone's end demand in this instance dollars? Because that seems to be the way people are looking at these cryptocurrencies. Am I making sense with what I'm saying?
Look what we're getting back to the crux of the argument. The population as a whole, the global population, everywhere, and you can look at this from a macro sense of a country to in an international sense. We collectively all decide what the value representation is, and the shifts happen, sometimes slow and then faster in some cases. So yes, the Venezuelan migrant who moved their wealth into Bitcoin and then left the country could have a end demand for dollars and then exchange that Bitcoin for dollars. Absolutely. And then that has another conversation to be had, that in the present moment, in the current day, the dollar is still very powerful. It's still very valuable to a lot of people around the world. Now, the question then becomes, will that maintain? Will that stay? Will that status quo remain forever? That's something I don't know. That's why it's a speculation. Exactly why it's a speculation. But I'm saying I would not be surprised if it does. Okay. So that's the purpose of this video. And I'll tell you, at the present moment, I have no exposure to cryptocurrencies. I don't. I have exposure to assets, and that's how I'm playing it. But I'm saying it from also the point of understanding that I won't be surprised, right? I'm explaining the mechanics, the reasons why it would become, okay, and then what to expect if it does. That's it, okay?
Okay.
And you're getting it, right? At the end of the day, we have to look at what the end demand is. And Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency can fulfill different purposes. Like it could become an international medium of exchange. That would, by the way, become the world reserve currency. That's what the world reserve currency is. The international medium of exchange, the currency that can become any currency. That is the world reserve currency. Right now, the dollar fulfills that role. If Bitcoin took that role, by the way, the US power would severely diminish on the global stage. There would be, the United States would suffer tremendously from it. So United States, it is in their best interest to not allow that at any capacity that they can, to definitely not allow Bitcoin to become the world reserve currency. If Bitcoin fulfills that role of a currency that can become any currency and that everyone in the world chooses to do that, very bad for the United States. Extremely bad.
Oh yeah.
Because MMT is more or less reliant on that theory, because MMT clearly states that other countries are not capable. It's describing, again, the system in which we live in. That's what MMT is. And the system we currently live in, it is fundamental that the US dollar maintains its, power, right? It's very reliant. So, because if we were in a quote unquote weaker currency or weaker country, we couldn't really feasibly borrow infinitely. We know that for sure. And again, it's because the rest of the world demands our dollars that we are able to get away with a lot, right? A lot. And then if we lose that, things can go pretty south. I would say if you are an individual, also to leave kind of more food for thought, if you're an individual who is more on the freedom side of things, Bitcoin might be like your best dream come true. If you're kind of more on the side that government has to fulfill certain obligations and certain roles, regardless of, economic consequence, the adoption of Bitcoin would be very bad for that political philosophy, if you get what I'm saying with those two. So you also, like, depending on what side you're on, really will determine whether or not you want Bitcoin to succeed or not Bitcoin. I say any fixed closed system. That's how I'll define it very specifically. Because again, it might not be Bitcoin, it might be something else, but it's whatever the population at the end of the day will perhaps eventually decide. A closed system. You would not be in favor of a closed system, because a closed system is not manipulatable. And imagine this, okay? Imagine borrowing against a currency that has a fixed supply, completely fixed supply, and you're leveraging up into infinity on it. Can you picture how dangerous that would be?
Yeah, that's pretty serious.
Yeah. So you would basically eliminate the potential of infinite deficit spending. That would be very, very dangerous. So if any of those were to become a currency, then there's another point I want to, so we kind of don't have to do another video on this, and this can be the one video. So I want to cover everything, but if you guys have stuck with us, good on you. There is maybe a lack of clarity out there of how, if a crypto, or let's actually keep using the term closed system. If a closed system eventually became the world reserve currency, okay, and let's say the closed system had a fixed supply, how would the value of the closed system keep growing? Well, remember, let's say now the global system is represented in terms of Fabio coin.
Nice.
Okay. Fabio coin is a closed system with fixed rules. I can't control it, even though it's named after me. I have no ability to control it. It has a fixed supply of 10 million coins or whatever. And everyone together collectively decides this has value. And since no one can control it, there's no rules that can be changed. I can rely on it to maintain itself over time. Similar again to how gold, slowly became the currency of the world. So let's say again, it's adopted. What eventually would become is the value representation of the global economy. The only way it would grow in value is if what else? It's already achieved maximum potential. It already represents all value in the economy. hypothetically,
Mhm.
how would it grow in value?
How would it grow in value? It seems like it's reached its cap at that
No, it
point.
hasn't. If the global economy grows, if more goods and services are produced, this coin, this currency would grow in value. It would be able to buy more goods and services than last year. It would be, that's how it would actually continuously rise, right? Remember, it would be the opposite it would be the opposite scale of inflation. So if currency is created, but the supply of goods and services remains the same, the currency will buy less and less and less. But if the supply of goods and services rises and rises and rises, right, the value of the currency should rise and rise and rise. It would be able to next year.
Because you can get more goods and services in that instance.
Because there's more available. There's more availability. There's less scarcity, right? So wealth in my estimation or definition, my personal one, we asked everyone to define it themselves, but wealth in my definition, we talked about this in another video, is when you have the desire for something, right? And when you have desires that you can fulfill them, right? That is how I measure wealth of a nation. So if the population inherently has desires, are they able to fulfill those desires? And if they're able to fulfill those desires, that would be the greater propensity of wealth. And then so improvements in technology will improve or lessen the scarcity of certain goods and services. And the measure of that wealth should be how the ability of that population to acquire those resources. And so we can measure that inherently in this hypothetical currency as the value rising, right? Because the greater propensity of production of goods and services, therefore, the way how far that currency can go goes even farther because there's a fixed amount. You can't make any more.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my thoughts. And to close everything off so that there's no confusion, I own no cryptocurrency at the present moment. I do think right now you're in a speculative moment in time. There is a potential for my personal opinion, for two of them to continue going forward, but I want to put an asterisk on Ethereum because Ethereum still technically is an open system. I would say the use cases for Ethereum are very intriguing, but as a closed system, Bitcoin is, in my opinion, personal opinion, the superior coin for one as a candidate to become an actual store value, reserve currency, etc.
So the keyword here is candidacy. That's basically,
and that actually opens another.
That it will, but it's a candidacy for it.
Yes, and that opens up another can of worms. That the argument that Bitcoin cannot be a store of value because of its volatility. You see, like I'm all for making arguments against Bitcoin, but I think the arguments need to be fair. Okay. Again, I don't own it. I have no vested interest. So that's why I say, you can kind of, just my opinion, I won't benefit from Bitcoin becoming the world reserve currency because I don't own it, right? But that argument is pretty poor, right? It's not a good store of value because of its volatility. Then no, it's not a good store of value in your thoughts because of the volatility, but the volatility should be natural because of its size, okay? What I mean by that is if it were to reach its maximum potential, AKA the value representation of the world, the volatility would be only that of the world economy growing or shrinking. Not very volatile. It's volatile because, for example, as the use case grows, as the adoption rate rises, it would grow in proportion to that adoption rate, the supply and demand, right? If everyone in the world demanded Bitcoin, the valuation of Bitcoin would be around, and again, I'm hesitant to always say it, but because I have to do it in order for us to conceptualize it, it would be the value of the world economy, the market cap of Bitcoin. That's its maximum potential. And I'll say that right here as as a strong opinion. The maximum potential of any currency is the global economy. Right. And I have to use the word dollars in dollar terms because that's how we conceptualize value. So it's not really what it would be, but that's how I have to say it. So if the global economy today measured in dollars is 100 trillion, right? Let's just say that. Then in dollar terms, the maximum capacity of Bitcoin would be $100 trillion. But if it reached that, you wouldn't really measure it in dollars. It's weird, I know, but that's how you have to conceptualize it. It's hard. And then, so again, the volatility after it reaches maximum capacity of any economy would lessen naturally. It wouldn't make sense for the volatility to continue because right now, since it's a fraction of the global economy, as adoption rate rises, right, it should go up. And then if adoption rate declines, it should go down. And again, I do expect volatility. I do expect a major correction in cryptos. I expect it. May not happen, but I expect it. And I won't be surprised if there is. And the reason why, right, I won't be surprised. And I'll say this, I apologize for ranting to everyone, but I'm trying to cover everything in one video as much as I can. So we don't have to make a clarification video, but we will if I am not making sense. But the reason why I do think that correction may occur is because a lot of the people holding it do not have demand for the currency. They don't. They have demand for another currency, and they're very willing to sell that currency and enter back into dollar system or whatever system they're from, the euro system, whatever. There are some people that are having demand for that currency and just that currency. But if you're in the United States or the Eurozone, you probably know the people around you, or maybe yourself, if you're invested in crypto, you're thinking about it in terms of exclusively in your own home currency, which should tell you, if you're being honest with yourself, that you don't have demand for that crypto at the end of the day. You have demand for that currency. And ergo, that currency you're buying is basically worthless to you. Only as valuable as the next guy's willing to pay for it, but pay for it in terms of what? In terms of that currency that you want. Am I making sense?
Yeah, makes sense to me. I'm just kind of like taking the passive listening
Right.
role, just
what
letting
do you
get it all out there.
What have you understood, Austin? Because you're like the signal whether or not I've done a good job at explaining things. What do you understand? Explain it back to me.
So I basically understand exactly that the value of basically any currency is just the amount people are demanding for it. And that Bitcoin, you can't exactly think of it in terms of dollars, specifically because a lot of people, when it comes to Bitcoin, are thinking of it in terms of dollars. But in this instance, you need to think of Bitcoin in terms of the actual currency itself, whereby if everybody is demanding Bitcoin, then the medium of exchange is Bitcoin. And not that Bitcoin is in and of itself an asset whereby it is producing a specific amount of value, but more so it's a storage. It's basically a storage unit. It's a storage of wealth, and then it's also a medium of exchange. And that is basically the.
And what about the volatility? Because the volatility argument is always against its being a store value or medium in exchange. They say it's too volatile, therefore it can't. Why is it volatile now? And feasibly, and I'm saying this, remember the purpose of this video is so I'm trying to put it out there so we're not surprised as to, the events that may or may not occur. Why is it volatile now? And why may it not be volatile if it's fully adopted? Once it's fully adopted, would it maintain its volatility? Yes or no? I'll start with that.
If it's fully adopted, then it likely wouldn't maintain its volatility. No. And then also the reason why it's volatile now is because people still have that demand for dollars. That's basically what I understood from that one there.
Not because the people have demand for dollars, it's its size. Literally, it's the size. Because if, for example, you see right now it's at, again, 1 trillion. And then let's say we know for a fact, somehow we know that in 10 years, the world will adopt Bitcoin. And let's say it went from a 1 trillion out of a 10 trillion economy. So now it represents the full 10 trillion economy. That's a 10x. That's extremely volatile. Well, volatility does not necessarily mean good or bad, by the way. It's neutral. Volatility means movement. So it moved up 10x. That's huge. It's insanely volatile. You shouldn't be surprised. Why shouldn't you be surprised? If you understand that Bitcoin or any currency, if it were to become the medium of exchange, would fill the hole. That's a better way to maybe explain it. It'd fill that hole, right? So what I mean by whole is that 10 trillion economy. And this is why I was more saying this to be careful with, Austin, not the other thing. When I say the word dollars, this is what I mean to be careful with. I'm using dollars as a representation of value because that's how our brains think currently in the United States. Any closed system currency, if it were to fill this hole, right, that is its potential growth. So if it's at 1 trillion, right now, because it's a small system, small little itty bitty system, of course it's going to be volatile because look how big the total system is. So this bubble, this little ball, it can grow and shrink within the system. Its maximum capacity is the system it's inside of, right? So let's say the ball grows, like it doubles, and now it's 2 trillion. It makes up a bigger portion of the bigger system, but is it still the full system? No. It could still go to 0. Right? That's the implied negative volatility, but the positive volatility has a cap, right? And the cap is the full 10. And I say the word $10 trillion because that's how we have to think about it, because we think in terms of dollars right now. Okay. So, but if it were to become the full bubble, we wouldn't think of dollars. We would actually discard dollars completely. And we think everything in terms of Bitcoin, right? Or any closed system, right? Gold, whatever. So this is the volatility argument where it dissipates. If the thing became fully adopted, volatility would only be so that the system itself grows and shrinks. So your economy grows, the price of the representative currency inherently grows. Economy shrinks, the price shrinks. And that's if supply remains fixed. If supply is fixed and adoption is full, there's no more adoption to be had, the growth would only grow if the economy grew, and it would shrink if the economy shrank. Make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So that's what I meant by that. It's not necessarily what we were talking about before, but yeah. Did I cover everything?
Yes, it did. Perfect. Do you have any closing thoughts here before I wrap up the show here today?
Yeah, just like if you're buying out, just remember you're really speculating. No matter what you're speculating. The only time that you're not going to be speculating is once it's fully adopted. Then you're not speculating.
Yeah,
because it's
all
already
right. Well,
fully
with
adopted.
that being said, we are the Capital Mindset Show. We are your hosts, Austin and Fabio. This is the Capital Mindset Show. We are your hosts, Austin and Fabio. Please be sure to share the video. It really, really helps out the channel. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Visit our website at capitalmindset.org. Follow our social media links at capital_mindset. We'll see you guys later. Take care.